this website, and they think we can build it for $2. But they just don't know. They just have no idea what it costs to build a website. And to make that even more difficult, there's companies out there that are templating their websites and saying, we can build you a website and have you up in 3 days for $900. Where is it? Man, you gotta love icons. Okay, so when you get a chance, when you guys get home, I welcome you to challenge you guys to check out Nike's website here, Nike ID. This is a website that would easily cost probably about 35 grand, and you build your own shoe. It's an interactive shoe designer. You point to different aspects of the shoe, change color, texture, design. It's amazing. That's an example of a really well-done website. Did anyone see that? Nike ID? Amazing. Okay, so we talked a bit about mock-ups. What's a mock-up? It's just a snapshot of a page on your website that's done either in Photoshop or Illustrator. It's just an image. Okay, so like we started out the presentation with a screenshot of my website that's down right now. That very might have well could have been a mock-up. You have no idea. It just turns out that's an actual screenshot of our website, but that could have been a mock-up, and it would have been just graphics put together by a graphic designer typically. So what I'm sharing with you guys is that you guys have an option before you commit to a web company to get a mock-up done by them. Take advantage of that. Get them to do a mock-up of at least your homepage, if not your entire site. And if they won't do it, their competition will. Give you a very good idea of what this type of quality you can expect from a company. Okay, always go with a local company. So you guys have heard of offshoring. Offshoring of stuff like web development. So companies in India and the Philippines and in China doing things for very, very cheap. Well, that's an option for you. You can go really cheap and save a truckload of money. What I'm saying is that the advantages of going local far outweigh those cost savings. Trying to explain something subtle like a change you want done to a web page or a website. We think a Creo Vision can only be done face-to-face. A lot of that stuff's really hard to explain, even with the things like net meetings and Skype, still very, very difficult. References are easier to check because a local company that's a bad apple is always going to be, they're going to have a reputation locally if nowhere else. Going to their office, meeting the team, getting a sense of the conditions in which they work. I mean, a lot of that can be an indicator of quality that you can expect from a company. Not all the time, but how do you know the guy that you're not talking to on the phone from Toronto isn't working out of like his dad's basement? And not that that's necessarily a bad indicator, but it can be. It's much easier to keep a web company accountable, and what I mean by that is, if this company knows that you can walk in the door and go, why haven't you been talking to me for the last month? They're going to be a little bit more accountable. Does that make sense? So tip number 8, beware of web companies only comprised of developers. So what I'm talking about here is a team comprised of developers that used to work for another company, where there was a BA and a project manager, deciding that they could create their own company and be building websites themselves on the side. There are a lot of companies out there like this. There's a ton, in fact. The problem with this type of arrangement is that in a lot of cases, not all, there's always going to be exceptions to everything I'm talking about here. In a lot of cases, these web developers only know how to do what they've been trained for, and that's the right web code. They're fantastic at developing. Horrible at managing projects. Horrible at getting the scope right. Horrible at understanding your business processes before they start writing code. It happens. I'm not saying that this team is not going to have an amazing web developer who's an awesome business analyst and a great project manager. It can happen as well, but I'm just saying beware. I mentioned here that educational background can come into play. It's not always the case. Some of the best developers that I've known are self-taught developers. But website design is so popular these days that you can pay $50 for an online degree, and then suddenly you can build websites. Versus someone with a degree in computer science or went to BCRT. There's a wide range of educational backgrounds that web developers can come from. So beware. And I mentioned, I think I talked about this, sorry, developers tend to generally misunderstand the scope of the project. You guys have heard of feature creep? What's feature creep? From someone in the back over there?
It's like when you enter a project and then as you go along, you realize you need more features and you keep adding on to it and the project is finished.
So typically as a web developer, my clients try to engage in feature creep. With a lot of these companies, of all developers, they themselves do the feature creep. Because they're so gung-ho on the technologies and putting widgets in, and you got to be careful with that. Tip number 9, you guys have heard of what a sunken cost is, right? You know what a sunk cost is? You guys are all business students, yeah? Don't be afraid to pull the plug if they drop communication. A lot of people, after putting their deposit down, and this is a horror story, this is a horror story that happens over and over again. People put their deposit down and they don't hear back from a company. Typically what's happened is the company has impressed you to try to get your business, and then they've realized that they can't deliver because they're either in over their heads, functionally, they can't deliver, or other projects have come along and made your project less important. Don't be that victim, don't be that person. If that's happening to you, call them and say, I've lost your faith in your ability to deliver on this project, and I'm pulling the plug. I'm requesting all the assets you've completed and the assets that you're currently working on. And just take all that, don't worry about the sunk cost, and shop for another company. And hopefully you learn something. Do it right the second time. Go ahead.
What's a reasonable way to structure a contract with a web development company in terms of to try and minimize, like if you do have to pull the plug to try and minimize your sunk costs?
Great, perfect. We're going to talk about that in a bit. When we start talking about service level agreements and mitigating your risk as a customer. And you're going to hear me say this over and over again, the online portfolio is your best friend. Okay? Tip number 10, know the difference between web design and web application development. You guys know now, because we talked about it already. The important point in this slide is that a lot of web design companies can't do web application development. What a surprise. But a lot of people don't know the difference between web design and web development. Quite a bit different. Web design is graphically intensive. It's more of an art. You have to have talent, like artistic talent. Application development, it's programming, mainly programming. Okay? So a team of amazing web designers that can build you a beautiful, visually impressive website may not be able to do app development. But they'll tell you they can to get your business. So what's the solution? Get them to show you something. So again, online portfolio is your friend. Get them to show you something that's similar in complexity to what you're looking for. Okay, CMS, content management system, we talked a bit about what that is. Super popular today, very, very trendy. Everyone wants it. Is it always a good idea? We don't think so. They're getting a lot cheaper with things like Joomla and Drupal and canned content management systems, but they still take time and money to implement. And if you can't perceive of your website ever needing a change in the next, let's say, year, like you're not a restaurant with a seasonal menu that's going to change every 4 months. I say forgo the cost. If you don't need it, don't be swayed into getting it because they're throwing it in as a bell and whistle. You don't need it. sort of touches on what I was talking about, companies throwing things in to try to win your dollars. Tip number 12, don't pick a web company because they are throwing in domain name registration and hosting. Okay? Do we know what that is? Well, it's right up there. Domain name registration. It's a selection and registration of your domain name, your URL. Hosting is the actual computer storage space where your website's being stored. These things cost next to nothing these days. Very, very cheap. So if you have a company that's waving their arms going, whoa, 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 go with us and don't go with them because we're throwing these things in, don't be impressed by it. Because 99.9% of the value that a web company provides for you is what? Graphic design. It's in the coding. It's in the branding. It's in the development. It's not in the infrastructure stuff. So keep that in mind. Tip number 13, beware of companies that guarantee, we talked about this, guarantee ranking as part of search engine optimization. I can't believe how many companies are out there right now that are guaranteeing you search results rankings. That's completely false advertising. You cannot guarantee anything, otherwise it'd be called search engine guarantee. It's an optimization. You're doing the absolute best you can with the content on your website. Okay? So an SEO guru could maybe guess what page you might show up if the words and phrases that you're targeting are really not as competitive, obscure. But if it's something like Vancouver shoes, I mean, no one's going to be able to guarantee where you're going to come up with that sort of thing. So beware of people who guarantee that. Right. Last point, companies lie. Boom, they do, fully. So tip number 14, don't forget about the maintenance phase of web development. Many customers are really excited when they get their first website and they're off. Boom, you've handed it over and they're done and they're excited. The work's been done, they don't want to think about what happens if, okay? A lot of these people, they end up in the situation where a bug is found a week, a month, 2 months, 6 months after the project's been handed off. What do you do in that case? Right? You've already paid the money for the website. What do you do? So what I'm suggesting to you is that you find out and you make sure, contractually that is, how this company is going to handle that. Okay, service level agreement. That needs to be in there. The maintenance phase, don't forget about that. So for CreoFusion, for example, our SLAs, we will give you a block of time in which we will fix all bugs discovered in that block of time. Tip number 15, just because their website is impressive doesn't mean their skills are. So a lot of customers will go to a website and be like, wow, that website's pretty cool. They have a cool website. And I know for sure that they can nail my website out of the park. And the fact of the matter is, a lot of these web companies get their own website built by other companies. I've had companies come to our company, go, can you guys build us a site?